Hello and welcome to LionWing Talks, a show about all things LionWing, as well as tabletop games, Japanese games, and localization. I'm your host and founder/president of LionWing, Bradley Hailstorm, and tonight we're going to be talking about some good stuff. We've got some project updates, I've got questions to answer, and we're going to go through our usual routine. However, in this episode, we are also introducing a new segment, which is something of a topic highlight that we're going to be doing, not every week, but a lot of weeks where I'm going to take a deep dive or do a deep dive on one specific topic as it pertains to our stuff, to our games. Now, it might be diving into some lore, it might be diving into some mechanics, it might be diving into components. It'll just kind of vary from week to week. And of course, if there's something that you all want to see, make sure to let me know through social media. You can find us at LWing Publishing across the board. That's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at LWing Publishing. Or you can drop into our Discord, where there's always some kind of chatter going on about one thing or another, be it anime games, LionWing stuff. I mean, there's always conversation happening there. You can find our Discord by either checking out our social media. Usually we post about it, or at least we post about it from time to time, or just dropping by lionwingpublishing.com. We've got a little community tab, and just click that. It'll take you to our Discord link, and there you go. Boom, you're in. We've got at least one person in the chat right now. Hey, Frank, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. And so we're going to break things up into 4 sections in tonight's episode. First section is going to be a little bit of an introduction, some housekeeping items. We're going to go into our question and answer session like we typically do. We're going to go into our project updates, and then we're going to hit our episode topic. So the episode topic tonight is going to be about Testament bonus characters. So you have that to look forward to. All right. First things first, though. If you've been hanging around the Discord, you have probably seen this, but I know, not everyone's in the Discord, or even if you are in the Discord, you're not necessarily checking it all the time. And so you may have missed that we've brought 2 new folks onto the LionWing team. They now comprise our new community team. They are community leads. That's their position titles. Both Sin Theory and Sam, or Real Beans, as you probably have seen him in the chat as. Both Sin and Sam have been in the chat for a while. I think Sin joined last summer during the Wild Hunt Festival campaign, so he's been around a long time. And then Beans joined, I think, right around Gun and Gun. So they are my community folks, and they're going to be keeping an eye on the Discord, but also being involved in just sort of overall engagement, creating content, helping out with contests, helping out with events, that kind of thing. And so they're going to wear multiple hats. Sam's more on the moderator side, so he's going to be modding the chat pretty closely, but Sin's modding the chat as well. But Sin will be more involved in kind of like the streaming side. So that is something that I wanted to also talk about here, but I'll do that in a second. So I'm really excited to have Sin and Sam join the team. It hit me not too long ago that LionWing is expanding. We have expanded pretty significantly from just a year ago this time. This time last year, we had just wrapped up our Testament campaign, and Testament was sort of our reemergence back into the tabletop field. We had started things off with a tabletop game in 2018 with Sonoma Coliseum, and then we moved into some video games localization and publishing stuff, and then Testament was kind of our return to form. And with Testament came a new drive and a new mission for LionWing. And so this time last year, we were just kind of kicking that off with Testament coming to a close, which was a very successful Kickstarter. And then we followed that up with Wild Hunt Festival, then Gun and Gun, and then just last month, Embryo Machine. So as we've been expanding, I've noticed a greater need to have folks on board to help out with community-related tasks, with community-related content. And so something that I've been wanting to do for a while now is I've wanted to do more streaming. Streaming not just of LionWing Talks. LionWing Talks is kind of one part of the streaming arena for LionWing, but I also want to start streaming games, start streaming some of our games, start streaming sort of like fight nights, that kind of thing. But also we're looking at streaming not just tabletop games, but also streaming some video games as well. A lot of folks in the Discord have more interest than just tabletop games, and they certainly have more interest than just LionWing stuff. And something that pretty much is universal in everyone in the Discord is everyone loves video games. We talk about video games as much as we talk about tabletop games. And so I was talking with Sam and Sin, who both said, I think there's probably an interest in maybe streaming something along those lines as well. So we haven't set anything firmly in place just yet, but in the future, I think you're probably going to see LionWing streams about 3 times a week. Thus far, it's just been one night, obviously, here on Wednesday nights with LionWing Talks, but I think you're soon going to see LionWing Plays, probably 2 nights a week. One night we'll dedicate to our stuff, and one night we will dedicate to just kicking back and relaxing and playing some video games. Monster Hunter Rise is coming out soon. I'm particularly hype about that game. I know a lot of people in the chat are also pretty stoked. So streaming something like that, or just streaming some other things that we play. In fact, I was talking with Sin and Sam about possibly jumping into Apex Legends. I used to play a lot of Apex, and I've gotten away from it in more recent months, but I'm trying to get back into it. And so we might be streaming that, or we might be streaming something else entirely. Who knows? We'll try to keep it interesting. But nevertheless, you can probably expect to see us 3 nights a week sometime soon. So that's it on that front. If you're around the chat, if you're in the Discord, say hey to Sin and Sam. You'll see them. They're in the chat a lot. That was part of why I wanted them to be on the team, is most people already know them. Sin, goes back almost a year at this point, so he's really seen the Discord grow, and he's seen the ebbs and flows of all of that. So if you see him around, say hey, drop him a congrats, that kind of thing. I'm really excited to have him on the team. Really, really excited. They bring new ideas and new energy, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm really wanting to make I'm wanting to make LionWing a community, and to do that, we've got to think of ways to bring people into the community, and to get people who are already in the community excited about being here. If they're not already, hopefully you are. Hopefully you're enjoying your time in the Discord, that kind of thing. So good stuff is on the horizon. Sin just joined the chat. Hey, Sin, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you got in some gun and gun tonight. I think you were playing earlier. We'll talk about that because you dropped a question in the LionWing Talks questions and answers channel and the server. So I'll get to that here in a little bit. All right. So okay, let's just jump into some questions. So this week we didn't have as many questions as last week. Last week was just like a barrage of questions right at the last minute, but we had a good number of questions this week too. So let's get to it. This one comes from the Discord, and it says, you mentioned in the past that you still do some playtesting inside LionWing. What is the goal of this playtesting? Is it to better learn the rules, to have fun? Are you still thinking about some changes in the game or small balancing? Yeah, so, I mean, the easy answer is to say, well, it's a little bit of all of the above. But the primary reason for playtesting isn't just to get acquainted with the game. That's part of it. I mean, certainly... I never want to be that person who's disconnected from the games we publish. And so it's important for me not just to play the games and familiarize myself with the games. After all, I'm the one scouting the games. So before they ever get to the LionWing team, I've already played a good amount of them because I need to know if I like them enough to pursue them for a business partnership. So that being said, not only do I and then the team play the games we're localizing just so that we acquaint ourselves with it, but it's also to make sure that something didn't get lost in translation. I wish that localization work was as easy as translating, doing some editing, boom, you're done. But the truth is, it's not. It's much more complicated than that, and you never know if something is going to get lost in translation, if in the translation process or even in the editing process, if the editor and the translator aren't talking with one another, you might have the editor change some verbiage around because they're editors. They're looking for flowery words. They're looking to spruce up the language. They're also looking to make sure that the words that are used reflect the rules as they understand them. And sometimes they might misunderstand a rule, or they might go to change some verbiage so that, the text reads better. But in that change, nuance gets lost in the original translation. Perhaps it was nuance that was needed to fully understand what a card or an ability or something like that does. And so by playtesting, you can really iron out some of the wrinkles that you probably wouldn't iron out or even see if if you were a localization and publishing company that never play tested, the stuff that you're putting out there. So I'm sure there have been some companies out there that just straight translate something and then they never really play test it or anything like that. But that would be unfortunate if that were the case, and it certainly is not the case for us. And so it's amazing the things you catch just by play testing yourself. I mean, even there have been times when I'll play a game in the beginning early on when I'm scouting for games, and I'll say, okay, yeah, this is a game that I want to pursue. And we'll go through the whole process, go through the whole negotiation process. We'll sign the licensing contract, et cetera, et cetera. It'll get to the team. They'll start doing their work because most of the time I'm not involved in the day-to-day stuff unless you look at like Gun and Gun, in which I was. But most of the time I'm not directly involved in the editing. It's amazing what will come up for you, though. Because I'll go back. I'll have already played the game, and then when our editing team is kind of done with their passes or done with their initial passes, I'll take it to the playtesting team and I'll playtest it myself. And it'll be one of those instances where I had read all of the text in the text document, all the edited text in a text document, and it all read perfectly, and it all made sense as I was reading it in that document or on that that spreadsheet. But then seeing it actually on a prototype in physical form can totally change how something reads, how something is interpreted. It's amazing just what happens when you go back and reread your own work. When I was in video games localization, I was doing a lot of localization on visual novels. And in a lot of cases, I was kind of like the lead editor on those projects. And so I was doing kind of the main routes of those visual novels. But then I had other editors who were doing side routes and who would, ultimately report to me. And I would always tell, those folks, especially kind of like the newer editors, it's important that when you make an edit to a line, it's important that you go back and you play that game with your edited work in it. And while you're reading your work in the actual game itself, you need to read that work out loud. Because seeing that work in the game itself is going to change how you understand the work. It's going to look, it's going to sound, it's going to read very differently than it did in that Word document you were working in. But you also need to read it out loud, because if you read something out loud, you're sometimes just hearing the words, something clicks in your brain and you're able to catch stuff that you were not able to catch, or that you assumed or made an easy inference with when you were just reading it off a screen and not hearing yourself kind of use and say the words that you yourself wrote or edited. So, it's a whole process, and the playtesting phase really allows us to do a lot of that stuff. And it also makes sure that there aren't any balancing issues that were missed in the original Japanese release. There have been some games that we have localized and are localizing, or games that we have talked to the designers about localizing that we didn't end up following through with, where the designers have said, hey, when we ship the game, here's what we shipped it with. And we found from player feedback that we really only would have gotten from shipping it to a bunch of people is that, this was kind of broken, or this was overpowered, or this wasn't quite clear. Do you think you as the new publisher, do you think you could clean that up for us? Or, hey, you really need to make sure this is a part of the English release because it wasn't a part of our release and we regret that. Let's make sure that it's different for yours. And so playtesting allows us to implement those changes, see how they kind of gel with the larger game. But also sometimes we'll playtest a game and say, hold on a second, something's not right here. Something's off here. This doesn't quite balance out, or, this mechanic isn't super refined. I think there's probably some tailoring that we need to do to this we need to tweak that mechanic a little bit to make, that mechanic a little bit more complete or robust. And we've done that. There are some designers out there who, when they design a game, they design that game from cradle to grave, and everything in there and everything that they hand to you is exactly as it should be. But some other designers, their ideas are mostly there, but not all the way there. Perhaps in the Japanese release or in some other territory's release, they got the ideas mostly there and said, all right, that's good enough for me. Let's ship this thing. But then when you as the publisher come along and say, hey, we're going to, introduce this game to a larger market, and we're going to do a fairly large print run, is there anything we should know? That's when we'll have some designers say, yeah, actually, this idea was sort of half baked. Here's what that thing needed to look like in the original release. So you do get that element. You do get to see some of that when you're playtesting that you maybe wouldn't otherwise. And so as we're playtesting, we're not just playtesting and taking notes internally so that we can then feed it back to the designers. We're really trying to maintain an open line of communication with the designers every step of the way while we are playtesting, because I think it's really important. Sometimes even with the best translator and even with the best localization editor, you might get something wrong. And so it's really important that if there's even the slightest doubt that you are understanding something, it's important, it's imperative that you check with the designer then of, hey, did we get this right? Are we understanding this correctly? And hopefully most of the time the designer comes back and says, yeah, that's exactly how that's how it should be. That's what we were trying to say with that particular mechanic or that particular rule. But there are times invariably where the designer comes back and says, no, that's not quite it. Let me see, tell me more about how you're interpreting this so I can try to clear that up for you so that you can then kind of allow it to make sense in your own mind so that you can then make sure that the text reads in a clear way. Because if you don't know what you're doing, as the editor or as the design company or the localization company, then clearly the player is also going to struggle with that as well. And so, Gun and Gun, for instance, was one of those games where there's a lot of nuance. Like Gun and Gun conceptually is a pretty straightforward game. But once you get into the nuance of it and you start seeing how does this card play off of this card, that's when things can get a little murky. And so we were constantly, probably more so than with any other game that we've done up until now, we were more in contact with Ken at Keep Dry than we have been with any other designer. Now it was great to have Ken there as a resource, and Ken is clearly very plugged into his own stuff, and Keep Dry in general is very plugged in to their properties and are pretty protective of their stuff. And so they want to make sure that the game, when it's being released in another territory, is being presented in the exact way that they would present it to their audience, the Japanese audience. And so Ken wanted to be involved in that conversation of, hey, bring any question that you possibly have, bring it to me. Like, I'll never be annoyed with you asking me questions. I want you to bring me questions if you ever feel in doubt about something. And so it's really great when you've got a designer kind of invested in that process. Some designers don't want to be a part of that. They're just like, that's not really what we want to do. We trust that you'll be able to get it right, or you'll be able to sort it out on your end. We don't really want to have like back and forths, and that's fine. That's just some designers. That's how it is. And by the time you get to the point of playtesting, you already know that that's how the designer works. And so you're not terribly surprised that they don't want to engage in that process. Because for me, I'm having that conversation early on before the contract is ever signed. Like, hey, are you the type that wants to be really involved in this localization, or are you going to be very hands off? So some are very hands off, and that's fine. But it is extremely helpful, especially with a complex game with lots of moving parts, when you have the designer's ear and you can really kind of pull on them as a primary resource to make sure that you're understanding things perfectly. Even with Gun and Gun, there were things where I was like, you know what, I'm like 99.9% positive I understand that, but I'm still going to ask because I'm not 100% certain. So, to go back to the original question, yeah, I mean, it's there to learn the rules. It's there to catch bugs. It's there to have fun. It's there to experience the game and understand what the player experience is generally going to be like. Because when you better know what the player experience is like, you can pitch it better, to backers or to customers or whatever the case may be. So you really need to be familiar with your own products is kind of the moral of the story, and playtesting is a great way to do that. It serves multiple purposes, and it has to be done. At least for us, it has to be done. We take that part of localization very seriously. The next question: since you only localize games you like, that means you need to test them. Tell us more about that part of the process. How many games do you import/test per year? Are those personal interests that migrate into LionWing projects, or do you also get games just to assess their LionWing potential? Do you test those with others? Do they all speak Japanese, or do you have to create reference cards or stickers? So a lot to unpack in this question. I think there's about 5 questions inside this question, so I'll go through it one by one the best that I can. I don't know how many games I import a year. A lot. I wish I could say like, oh, I import 45 games a year, but I have no idea. It varies. It depends kind of year to year. I will just say this: I import a lot, a lot. In this line of work, especially in my role, you can never have enough products to sample. Because it's not like when I order games, like I just did a huge bulk order a couple days ago, and those games will be here probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not like I'm going to use those games to decide what our next Kickstarter project is going to be in November or something. No, at this point, I'm getting games to figure out what our 2023 lineup is going to be. And so you're always playing games. I'm always playing games and assessing their potential for LionWing, especially when I import. But I'm really kind of assessing their potential for years in the future. Now, there are some instances where I might get a game, let's say in 3 weeks, and I'm like, no, this game has to take the spot of something that I had planned, for spring of next year or something. And then you kind of look at your schedule and you figure out, all right, how do I reconfigure the schedule so that it makes sense? You can't do that a whole lot because most of the time, at least how I operate, I like to let our partners know kind of a general idea of when we are going to, bring their products to the market. And so, it's not great business etiquette to say like, oh yeah, we're gonna launch a Kickstarter for your project in March of 2022, and then March of 6 months before, you're like, actually, we're going to push your stuff to November of 2022. Are you okay with that? Like, you might be able to get away with that a few times, and some designers are very understanding, but you don't want to necessarily have a reputation for that. So I try not to do that kind of thing. Invariably, it does happen. Like I said in the last show, I have swapped our summer and fall Kickstarters, where the summer one that's coming up now was originally the fall Kickstarter, and now the fall Kickstarter was originally our summer Kickstarter. So it does happen, and you do have to be able to read the tea leaves and understand where the market's at to make sure that you're presenting the best possible product. But you don't want to go back on too many on too many promises and too many agreements, because word does travel. It's not like the Japanese tabletop scene is like huge. A lot of, dare I say, most design circles in that scene talk to one another, or they at least know of one another. They see one another at conventions. And so word like that travels, and you don't want to be that company that has a bad reputation of like signing a contract, with a project and then pushing it out for years or dropping it entirely. I will say this at this point, with LionWing, I mostly import to assess potential, which is unfortunate. I wish I could go back to the days when I imported to just have fun with games. But in this line of work, that's very hard for me to do at this point. I can't play a Japanese game and not think about, hey, could this be a LionWing product? That thought will invariably cross my mind at least once with almost everything I play, just because that's the type of, business person, I guess, that I am. I'm constantly assessing, would this make sense for our catalog? Now, there are some games that I will import where I know up front, like, I'm not going to be assessing this for a possible LionWing project. But I'm already having that conversation with myself up front as I'm researching the game. So I'm having that conversation of, could this be one? Could it not be? No, this isn't one. But I'm going to import it anyway because I do want to play it just for my own purposes. So there's a little bit of a gray area, but generally speaking, it's very hard to go back to just playing games for fun. It's like fantasy sports. Once I got into like fantasy hockey or fantasy baseball, it was hard to enjoy hockey and baseball without the fantasy component to it. It's like some bells can't be unrung. And I think that's certainly the case when it comes to running a company that deals in localizing other territories' products and then trying to enjoy those other territories' products for fun. It's just a very hard thing to do because you're constantly looking at the business side of things. Let's see here. Do I test them with others? Usually I'll get a game and I'll just play it by myself, even if it's like a 3 to 5 player worker placement game. I'm going to play it by myself first. I'm going to play multiple, I'm going to just play multiple people. And obviously that's not the normal way you would want to play these games, obviously. But when it comes to, if I'm looking at a game to assess the potential for LionWing, I kind of want to know what all is involved in that process. And I like to do that on my own without the company of other people. I find that to be too distracting. Like if I play a game for the first time and I'm interested in it, and I want it to possibly be a LionWing product, I don't want other people with me the first time I play it. It messes up my vibe. It just does. I don't like it. I want to like sit in a room by myself and just experience the game in my own way. And sometimes that's experiencing that game much slower than I would experience it if there were three other people sitting around the table and I felt pressure to kind of perform in a certain way. I don't want any of that because that's going to mar my vision of that experience. And I need to experience the game in a way that makes sense to me. And so I'll always run it by myself several times, and then I'll bring other people into the fold. Now it's been different with COVID. Especially all of last year, it was much harder to figure out how we were going to play test. And so we had a lot of creative ways of playtesting virtually. It wasn't the ideal. It wasn't the ideal situation. They were not the ideal circumstances to playtest a game. But you do what you have to do when you're in a global pandemic that happens once every 100 years. You just have to sort of adapt to what the world is telling you have to adapt to, and that's what we chose to do. But prior to the pandemic, then once I kind of experienced the game the way that I needed to experience it and decided, yeah, this is definitely something that I want to pursue, then I would bring other people in and say, all right, let's come over, let's test this thing out. I want to get your feedback on it as someone who's never played it, or as someone who's not invested in this in the same way that I would be running LionWing. I want you to give me kind of your objective feedback. Don't pull any punches. Don't try to sugarcoat anything. I want it all raw. I want the good stuff. I want the bad stuff. I want everything in between. And so usually the first couple times that I invite people to play the game, I'm not play testing in terms of like, let's see if the game is balanced or anything. I'm just looking for player experience external player experience outside of myself. And so that's where I look for that it's sort of my feedback phase, because sometimes I'm a little biased for a game. Like I'll scout a game. I'll say I have to have this game. And I've already made up my mind about how much I like that game long before it ever gets to me, long before I ever even have a chance to play it. And so I'll go into a game already pretty biased. Like, I love this game. I don't even care if the game's not fun. Like, I love the look of it. I love the presentation, or I love the characters. I love the story, whatever the case may be. And so inviting others into that process to give me their objective feedback can help ground me to say, hold on, Bradley, you're going to get feedback from other people, and these other people represent folks who would buy your game. And if they're not going to have fun with it, you need to understand why they're not going to have fun with it so that you can make an educated decision on, is this something that you want to follow through on? Despite loving it so much, maybe other people won't. So that's typically how that process works. Usually we'll use reference cards or paste ups. That's typically how it happens. Paste ups is the way to go for us. Because at that point, I'm not even certain that I'm going to follow through with it. I'm not even certain that it's going to be a product. And so, I don't have like a working prototype or anything like that. Now, some designers, and it's becoming a little bit more commonplace, is they'll include, either a dual language option on the cards themselves, or they'll ship with like a Japanese language option and then also an English option for their components and for their assets and for their rulebook. And that is fantastic. Manifest Destiny does that a lot, thinking about Testament, since that's our episode topic for tonight. A lot of Manifest Destiny products ship with both Japanese and English right there on the card, and ship with 2 separate language manuals, which is like the best thing that you could ever want in my position. But not everyone does that, even though it's becoming more and more commonplace. It's still not commonplace. It's still not, the norm when it comes to language practices. So, we'll make use of English paste ups because not everyone speaks Japanese on the team. Next question. What's the process like for addressing / creating stretch goals? Yeah, so I kind of talked about this in an earlier episode, so I won't talk about it in great length, but I will say this. Pretty much once the contract is signed, once I have a contract signed, a licensing contract signed with the design circle, we'll start brainstorming stretch goals right at the beginning. And we'll have that conversation about potential stretch goals throughout the course of its localization development. And some designers really want to be involved in that process. Other designers are like, just tell me what you want and I'll figure out a way to make it happen. Other designers are like, I don't care, but we're also not going to make any of that content that's on that's on you to figure out. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. Every designer is different. And so I just like to know up front, are you going to be someone who really wants to be involved in the stretch goal creation? Are you yourself going to create the assets for it? Or do you just want to be able to kind of give your final stamp of approval? Or what's that process going to look like for us working together? If they really want to be a part of if they want to be a part of the process, then yeah, we will talk all throughout localization, the localization development period about what we can incorporate and what we couldn't. But at the end of the day, all of those decisions default to me. I'm the one who's going to decide, run by, and then okay what the stretch goals are going to be. Certainly, I need to have the designers' validation on that. They need to say like, yeah, go ahead, that's fine with us, that's cool. Or I need them to, if they're involved, I need them to say, yeah, we can do that for you, or we can get that done for you, or whatever the case may be. But I start thinking about stretch goals, right in the beginning. In fact, if I'm really convinced that I want a game and I'm convinced that the contract negotiation process is going to go smoothly, I'll start brainstorming stretch goals before the contract's even signed. But it's once the contract is signed, that's when I'll have kind of the open dialogue with the designers themselves. And I usually present them with a bevy of options. I'll usually present anywhere in the ballpark of like 10 to 20 stretch goal ideas, and we'll say to them, all right, so which ones do you like? If you're going to be a part of this process, which ones do you think are doable within the time frame that we're working with? And then the process will sort of unfold from there. We'll narrow things down. But I really like to have a lot of options up front. And I do that kind of on my own time. I really like to try to add value to all of our Kickstarters. I mean, I think that should be the basis of any Kickstarter campaign is folks need to see the value in your proposition. And they need to see the value in kind of your tier rewards, but then they also need to see the value of those stretch goals. To me, I think about pricing when it comes to stretch goals, because a lot of folks, they just look at the tier bar and say, oh yeah, it's $30 for game A. Well, I'm looking at the components and it doesn't really seem like I'm getting a whole lot for $30. And I do think that it's on the publishing company or the ones running the Kickstarter campaign to make sure that the person sees that, we're all that price tag also incorporates the stretch goals. And for LionWing stuff, we've never not hit our stretch goals, all of our stretch goals. So I really try to space out and price our stretch goals in a realistic way. I never try to do these extravagant stretch goals that I don't think are attainable. All the stretch goals that we come up with and then how we price them, I do so very intentionally because I believe through research and through projections that we're going to be able to, smash through all those stretch goals. And so sometimes I'll have a conversation with someone of, the price is that, but this is kind of what we're expecting to do with stretch goals. And these stretch goals are going to add this type of value or this value to the game. And that's all sort of included in that price. So much happens behind the scenes when it comes to Kickstarter creations and Kickstarter strategy. And, as a backer, you're not necessarily thinking about that stuff. You shouldn't. You don't need to think about that stuff. And at the end of the day, you need to know where your dollar is going and you need to know what you're getting for your dollar. And so, I try to make our reward tiers pretty descriptive about what you're getting and, stretch goals and that kind of thing. But I also try to, make sure that that's very clear on the campaign page. That's why at the end of most of our campaigns, I will throw the stretch goal map at the top of the page before anything else, like in the last 72 hours or so, for folks when you get that kind of like that final rush of backers, for them to see like, these are all the things that have been added to the game. And this stuff is just included in the price of the game, because then when you see that, paired on the same screen with your reward tiers, it's like, oh wow, okay, this is a lot of value. This is a lot of bang for my buck. And I think that's an important part of Kickstarter strategy. Someone in the chat said, our team's so smart. No. So who I talked to in the beginning at, who I talked to at the beginning of the process of signing the licensing contract is typically the same person that I'm talking to at the end of the process. I mean, we don't work with teams that are massive. I think the Keep Dry team was the largest team that we've worked with, and that's because there were 6 or 7 of them. But even still, I started the conversation off with Ken at the very beginning when I first, talked to him and kind of gave him my pitch of what I was interested in. And he's still the person that I talk to. And he's pretty much been the only person I've talked to other than one of the other designers of the game. And that is pretty commonplace. Keep Dry is a larger team than what we've worked with. So it's especially true for those smaller teams. Like I think about Sonoma Coliseum, the team was 2 people. I think about Testament, which that team was huge when you look at the credits of that game. But really, it comes down to Kuro and then Simon, who who represents Kuro, Manifest Destiny, Japan Brand, Arclight, a bunch of other companies. And so I talked to those two, primarily Simon, from start to finish. The same thing was the case with Wild Hunt Festival. My initial contact was Ramosan, and Ramosan is still the only person that I talk to. Now I'll have I might have meetings, especially in the beginning, because oftentimes we'll do some some Skype meetings or Discord meetings or whatever where it's over video, and I'll get an opportunity to physically see the whole team, and I'll get an opportunity to introduce myself to the whole team, and they'll get the opportunity to introduce themselves to me. And so I might see the whole team then, but most of the time the teams are small and they designate one person to be sort of the main contact. I think that's what you're asking, Sai. Let me know if it's not. The next question, any spoilers for the solo mode for Embryo Machine? So not yet. I did share just in a comments reply, just like last week, that we were going to be showing off the solitaire mode for Embryo Machine in a couple weeks. So it's the 17th today. I think we're probably looking at the first week in April to reveal that. I think and I hope people are going to like the solo mode. It's going to introduce, obviously, some new mechanics. Anytime that you're working with an AI deck, you introduce new mechanics that simply were not in the game before. But we're introducing a ton of new cards to the game to compensate for that AI deck. Well, I shouldn't say a ton because that makes it sound like we're introducing like 50 new cards, and that's not the case. I can't remember the card count off my head that are exclusive to the solo mode, but there are new cards that were designed, that were created, that were play tested, and that will be printed specifically for the solo mode. I've seen some people, talk about how solo modes in other games can be pretty underwhelming, or they feel half-baked, or they feel tacked on. And I hope that's not the case with Embryo Machine. I mean, obviously, anytime that you're adding a new mode to a game that never had that mode to begin with, a game that was never designed around that mode, a game that never originally shipped to its original territory with that mode, probably will always feel a little tacked on to some degree, just because you are, in fact, adding something to a game that was never there or intended for before. And so you can't get around the idea you can't get around the fact that it's not going to be as robust as the rest of the game, because that's not how the game was designed. And that certainly is true for Embryo Machine. The game was designed to be a player versus player competitive game. And now we're saying we're taking one half of the entire experience out of the equation, and we're introducing an AI deck. An AI of a tabletop game is not exactly comparable to a human being. And so it's going to feel differently. My hope, though, having seen it, having read it, having played it, is that it does enough to for people to say, you know what, this feels good. This is fun. At the end of the day, anytime that we're adding a new mode to a game, I want people to say, oh yeah, this is a cool addition. I like this. I'm having fun with this. I want to play it again. The same thing was true for Testament and Wild Hunt Festival. We added on Nightmare mode to Wild Hunt Festival. We added on EX mode to Testament. And those were things that obviously didn't exist before, but they're hella awesome. And I hope that's the case with Embryo Machine. Now, Wild Hunt and Testament were a little different because it's a cooperative game, so you're always facing some kind of AI deck in a way. So to introduce another mode that also played off an AI deck was pretty easy to do. Here, though, the game wasn't built to be played against anything other than another human being. And so you're going to lose some of the magic that is inherently a part of a PvP game. I was just playing Rainbow Six Siege a few days ago. Like, when I play the single player mode, basically the tutorial in Siege, it's not quite as fun knowing that I'm just shooting bots. They don't react as dynamically. The same thing is true with a tabletop game. You're never going to be able to replicate that human to human kind of experience that the game was originally designed around. So no spoilers just yet, but you won't have to wait much longer just to see most of the mode anyway. And the last question for tonight: how will the Gun and Gun Virtual League be structured in terms of formats? Will players use 2 copies of the game or just one? This is a conversation that happened like 2 hours before we went live with this show. And yeah, so right now the Virtual League is going to essentially act as if each player is bringing a copy of the game to the match. So 2 copies of the game. This allows players to feel the same guns and gunners. And so that way you're not, someone picks this gunner and this gun. If you wanted to play that particular loadout, well, now you have the option if there are 2 copies of the game. The 2 copies of the game does allow the game to be more competitive, and it allows you to play the loadout that you want to play. But, I actually like 1 copy games. I like 1 copy gun and gun games. I think they're more challenging. Sure, they may not be as personable as of an experience. And sure, you're not being able to pick the exact loadout that perhaps you wanted because maybe your opponent picks part of that loadout or all of that loadout that you wanted to field. But there's something really unique and challenging and fun about, saying to yourself, oh shit, that's exactly who I wanted to pick. Those are the exact guns that I wanted to play. I can't pick those anymore. So now I have to adapt. So although in the rule book and through a lot of the messaging, we've said that, 1 copy game of Gun and Gun feels more like a traditional board game, whereas 2 copies feels more competitive. I would actually say that 1 copy of the game will make you a better Gun and Gun player because it will make you play in ways you haven't or wanted to play. It'll make you select loadouts that you may not have chosen otherwise. And so it'll make you understand all elements of the game. Whereas if you always play with 2 copies and you can choose anything that you want, you really only are only incentivized to try new things by your own internal drive to do so. Whereas with a one copy game, you're forced to play in a new way. You don't get the choice of saying, oh, I think I want to play someone different tonight, or I want to play different guns tonight. You no longer have that option. You just have to sort of pick what's left over. And I think that makes you a better player. So in the manual, we say for your first couple games, you should play with 1 copy, just because it's less overwhelming. But I would say you should actually play with 1 copy for quite a bit longer than just the first couple games, because you will be a better player because of it. All right, so that is it for the questions tonight. Let's hit some project updates. Testament. Nothing new on the Testament front, unfortunately. I have not heard where we're at with pallets being on ships and those ships being on water and all of that. I don't know what's going on. I hear about updates as soon as everyone else hears about updates for the most part. And so, we're excited and we're anxiously awaiting the games just like everyone else. I cannot wait for people to get Testament in their hands. A Karate update. I don't think the games got picked up Saturday, and I haven't gotten a response yet to my original email on Sunday of, hey, did our games get picked up yet? So I do know that they were finally put on pallets. So we are 1 step closer to getting picked up if they were not picked up. So I do know they got on the pallets, which is also, that's not as good as being picked up and put on a ship, but I'll take being put on pallets as opposed to sitting in a factory. So, there's a silver lining in there somewhere. A Gun and Gun update. So playmat production samples are finished. I haven't seen them yet. Storage box samples reportedly came back a little too thick with the material that they used, and so they had to send them back to have another one printed for a sample. Haven't seen those yet either. Sleeves are ready. Haven't seen those yet. Nothing else has been proofed. The printer apologized practically all over themselves, which I understand that there's not much more they can do. They can only work at the speed at which they can work. But it is a little frustrating to know that we are in the middle of March and we don't even have all of our proofs printed yet. At this point, with Wild Hunt Festival, we had long gotten our proofs. Now, as I've mentioned, we're using a different printer than Wild Hunt Festival. For Gun and Gun, we're using the same printer we used for Sinome. They were a great printer the first time around. This time, this experience has left a little bit to be desired, let's say. I appreciate that they were very apologetic. And so clearly they recognize their error in this and they recognize that they need to expedite this process. But I don't know if their awareness of needing to expedite the process is actually going to convert to expediting the process, because I haven't seen it so far. And to be told that they have production samples, but for me to not even see a digital proof, it's pretty frustrating. I won't say it's concerning. It borders on concerning. But I know that this printer is reliable because I've used them, and I know that they print for a lot of other companies, much larger companies than LionWing. So I know they're reliable and I know that they're trusted, but they are working impressively slow. I mean, it's impressive how slow they're working. It's almost so slow that you would almost have to intentionally be working this slow to work this slow. I mean, it's pretty frustrating. So that's an update on Gun and Gun. I wish I had a better update for Gun and Gun. I do want to cut the printer some slack, because I do know that although, the COVID projection is looking less bleak than it looked, just 6 months ago. And therefore, fulfillment, shipping lanes, printing backups are better than they were. I still know that all of those things are still congested. They're not as congested as they were at the end of the year, last year, but they're still pretty congested. So I'm trying to cut them some slack in that regard. I know everyone's doing the best they can. I would just like this process to move along with a little bit more speed. With Embryo Machine, yeah, so we're going to be showing off the solo mode soon. I'm excited for this. We are going to also be showing off the Hystrix digital file, which just came to me 3 days ago. Yeah, on Monday. So 2 days ago, I guess. Monday morning. And it looks awesome. It looks super rad. So that's actually going to be the topic of conversation for our Embryo Machine update, which will be hitting tomorrow or Friday. I'm halfway done with that update, so maybe tomorrow, but most likely Friday. Let's see here. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some Testament stuff. I need to pull it up here. I thought I had it pulled up. I did not, so give me a moment. I know dead air does not make for good audio. I am well aware. So tonight I'm going to be spotlighting and primarily talking about the bonus characters that we added to Testament. So through the campaign for Testament, we added a number of things. I think what most people were excited about was the inclusion of 2 new characters in the game. We added an EX mode and we added items and that kind of thing, and that stuff is all rad. I really like EX mode. But I'm most excited about the characters we added, primarily because I got to design them. I told the illustrator kind of the characters that I wanted, and I coordinated, of course, with Kuro, and Kuro had his own ideas of, hey, I think these characters would fit. I think this type of character would fit in with Testament. I think Testament would benefit from these types of characters. And then I came back with, okay, yeah, no, I can work with that. Let me come up with, a general, rough concept for what these characters should look like and how they should play and that kind of thing. And that's what I love about Kuro, is he really kind of gives his partners the room to kind of expand upon his games in whatever way they see fit. He wants to have the final say. He wants to be able to say, I sign off on that or not, but he pretty much always signs off on what you present to him, as long as it's good. And it really allows the publishing company to tailor their game to the new market, to the English market. Not everything that is going to work in the English market is going to work in the Japanese market. So you do get an opportunity to say, I think there are some gaps in the original product, and here's my chance to fill it. And that was the case with adding more characters to the game. That was the thing outside of wanting more skill cards. That was the thing that people wanted most, at least from those who commented on the game on the campaign page. Everyone was saying, like, can we get more characters? Can we get more characters? Because 4 characters, yeah, I think 4 characters is a good amount. But let's be honest, we all like new characters. We all like new heroes in games. We want more player choice. And so early on, it was one of those situations. Again, when I was planning out the campaign in my head, it was like, do we add new monsters? Do we add new bosses? Do we add new characters? And ultimately, I decided, no, everyone wants new characters. And then that was pretty much confirmed within like the first 2 hours that the game was on Kickstarter. People were like, please tell me that the stretch goals have more characters. And it's like, yeah, actually it does. That's what we have planned for y'all. So we have 2 characters. We have Lunata and we have Reardane. So let me see if I can share my screen here. One second. Might be more interesting if I can share this. There we go. Okay. Yeah, maybe I won't be able to do that. I should have planned for having a second window here, but actually I may be able to do this. Again, this doesn't make for great audio, but nevertheless, here we go. That'll do. Let me shrink this window down a little bit. Okay, yeah, no, that did nothing. All right. Well, maybe I can just throw it back up in the form that it was. That's good enough. Okay, so here we've got our 2 characters, our 2 bonus characters, Lunata and Reardane. So when I was planning out what these 2 characters were going to be, of course, I was thinking about Final Fantasy XIV. Testament is heavily inspired by Final Fantasy XIV. It practically is Final Fantasy XIV, the board game. I wish we could have attached the Final Fantasy XIV name to it because it would have fit in, perfectly with the actual MMO. Nevertheless, because the game drew so much inspiration, because the Testament drew so much inspiration from 14, I wanted to make sure that same philosophy was carried over in whatever new additions we made to the game through stretch goal unlocks. And so I thought about, all right, we've got our 4 characters, the 4 base characters of Testament. Thinking about the classes that are available in Final Fantasy XIV and thinking about what this game could benefit from if we added 2 new characters to the game, what would it be? And I said to myself, well, I think a sort of like a samurai-based class would be really cool. And so I remember, pitching it to Kuro, and instead of having the samurai class as being sort of the tank that it is in 14, he kind of put a spin on it and said, well, let's not have this particular class. Let's not have this particular class follow that same path. Let's not have this particular samurai type class be a tank in Testament. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. The design elements way better than I ever could. You created the game. I'm gonna follow your lead on this one. But he did say, but I like the idea of a samurai type class for this new edition. What do you think about maintaining kind of that same aesthetic for this character? And that's when I said, yeah, absolutely. And let's make her look like a Lalafell. That was kind of the thing that I wanted. And so we came back with this particular piece of art that you see on the screen right now. And that was it. That was his involvement in the whole thing. Other than he had a design partner ultimately design the mechanics for Lunata for this particular class. And so once they designed kind of the look and how this character would play in the game. The rest was up to me. I wasn't given any other information. I wasn't given this character's name. I wasn't given how old they were. I wasn't given their backstory at all. And so that's when I was like, all right, excellent. Now I get to kind of go in there and do my thing. I'm going to create as interesting a character as I possibly can. And so out came Lunana. I wanted her name. Her full name is Lunana Ciccone. So I wanted her to have a very Lalafell sounding name. So the repeating letters, the repeating elements of the name was a top priority when I was putting her name together. Originally, her name was Lulana, which is sometimes still, because it was the first name that I originally wanted, I still will catch myself saying Lulana. And then changing it to Lunana was sort of a late call that I did, not at the last minute or anything, but I had already been writing for this character as if their name was Lulana. So like somewhere in my brain, I just can't get rid of that information. She's forever Lulana in my head, but nevertheless, her name is Lunana Ciccone. And as it says here, for folks who are, not watching the video or catching this on the podcast, I'll read you a little bit about her backstory. And it says, once the blade of the crown to Lady Hohoka of the Windaria Republic, Lunana left her position as head of the queen's personal bodyguard retinue in search of her missing sister. Although Lunana and the queen had been best friends since childhood, Lunana could no longer prioritize her duty to state after finding out that there were recent sightings of her sister in the Miranglav capital city of Tauron. So Silent Frank in the chat said, is it too late to get Testament? No, it's not. You can still late pledge. I think someone late pledged just last week, right after I talked up Testament in last week's LionWing Talks. So you can head on over to japanimegames.com and find the Testament page and place your late pledge there. Someone else in the chat, before I get back to that, said, do you validate your editions against other languages to avoid unfortunate names? Yeah, so we tried to, and this was also that was very sort of at front and center when it came to Embryo Machine, especially. And someone in the chat actually pointed this out along the way of, on the Embryo Machine unit boards, there's certain elements of that board are called certain things. And ultimately we decided we don't really like what these things are being called. And so we're going to make a change, knowing that we're kind of getting away from the source material a little bit, but also knowing that it's going to pair better if we ever pursue Embryo Machine expansions. It's going to pair better if we change this language to standardize it across some of the expansions. And so we will do that. I don't necessarily know if we've looked at the names of things and juxtapose other languages and made a decision on the English terminology based on how those things compare to other languages. I think that is a rabbit hole that is practically never ending. And so sometimes you want to make sure that the thing you're choosing is for your intended, demographic. And so our intended demographic is the English market. And so if it works, if it makes sense, if it's presented in the best way possible for your English market, your target market, then for me, both running the company as a localization editor and as an editor on some of our games, then I usually I will usually go with that. If that thing meets those criteria, if that terminology meets those criteria, then I'd say, all right, that's a good name and we're going to keep it. Sometimes I'll kind of dig into the history behind the translated name. Embryo Machine actually had a bit of that. Embryo Machine is an old property. And so there was a lot of history there, and there was a lot of design choices made in the original tabletop role-playing game of Embryo Machine, why things were called what they were called, that I did take into consideration when I was looking at changing some of the names, because I was pretty involved in making sure that the terminology of the game sounded the best that it could. And so we did compare some of those names to the original source material, which a lot of that stuff was a lot of the names in the Embryo Machine universe come from the French language. And so I did look at our translated name and compared it to the Japanese, to the katakana, and also to its French origins. And sometimes I would keep things as they were, and other times I would say, I understand that this world has a certain connection to the French language, but no one buying Embryo Machine in the English for the English version has played the tabletop role playing game, and they don't give a shit about that game, and they don't care about some backstory behind why the name was chosen this way, because it made sense in the role playing game for their Embryo Machine board game. And so I made the decision based on that alone. I don't know exactly if that's what you were asking, Sai, but that's kind of how I interpreted that question. Back to Lunana here. So it was fun coming up with Lunana's backstory. Something you may catch right away, in the first sentence it says, so once the blade of the crown to Lady Hohoka of the Windaria Republic. So the Windaria Republic was actually, I took inspiration from Final Fantasy XI, because I'm not exactly an old guy, but Final Fantasy XI was one of the first MMORPGs that I ever played. I suppose Phantasy Star Online was the first MMORPG I ever played. And then I probably played EverQuest Adventures before Final Fantasy XI on PS2. But nevertheless, I consider both PSO and Final Fantasy XI to be my first MMOs. And Final Fantasy XI has a special spot in my heart. And I love that game. And in many ways, I like Final Fantasy XI more than Final Fantasy XIV. I like its systems a little bit more, despite the fact that they're very archaic, and they were even archaic for their time. But that's part of its appeal. And I loved Windurst. Because that's where the Tartaros were from in Final Fantasy XI. And so because Lunana was modeled after Lalafell, and Lalafells were modeled after Tartaros, I said, all right, I'm going to pay homage to, the origins of that species of Final Fantasy XI, therefore Final Fantasy XIV, therefore Testament, and I'm going to work in, that Windurst name in a subtle way, and that's where I came up with Windaria, and I also paired it with Republic because I thought about some of the other locations, some of the other kingdoms in Final Fantasy XI, kind of merged the two together. In fact, there's a lot of Final Fantasy XI inspirations in the backstory, the lore that I wrote for Testament. There's a lot of inspirations from a lot of different games. Anytime that you're writing fiction, you want to pull inspiration from all different types of sources and not just one, because then you limit yourself. But Final Fantasy XI certainly was in the front of my mind, along with Final Fantasy XIV and some others like Final Fantasy V and things outside of Final Fantasy that kind of went into my building the world of Testament. But you will notice in some of the names, like, oh yeah, I can tell that's a nod to this or that, and Windaria is a nod to Final Fantasy XI. So basically, well, I'll keep reading here, and then I'll talk about her a little bit more. So it says, upon arriving in Taron, Lunana immediately began questioning the city's denizens on her kin's whereabouts, so her sister. After days of investigating, she spoke with an adventurer from the Mercenaries Guild who had mentioned that a Pokapoku, there's an inspiration, fitting Lunana's sister's description, had come through the city a while back. She stated that she had spoken with a Poku, and that Poku mentioned Lunana's sister, was headed to the Ark with an expeditionary party. So this is particularly... I wanted to write this backstory in the way that I did because I needed to give Lunana a motivation for joining the adventuring party. I needed to get her on the Ark some way. But I also was really married to this idea of her being kind of the head guard in Lady Hohoka's kind of entourage. And so I thought, well, why would someone give up their stately duties, especially to someone that not only do they have a duty to, but someone they consider a friend? Why would they ever give up that position? Why would they ever leave that position? What would be the thing that would pull someone away from that spot in life? And it's like family. Family would pull someone away like that. And so I thought, all right, what can I do with family? And so I threw around a bunch of ideas, like, dying mother, dying father, dying brother, dying sister. Of course, I immediately went to like, someone's dying and she's got to be there by their side. And I thought, well, that feels cliche and trite and like, meh, that's also just not very interesting. So then I started thinking, well, perhaps I can build some mystery around the reason of why Lunana would leave her post. And that's when I, once I had that thought of, ooh, let's build mystery. Let's incorporate mystery into this game a little bit. Because there is mystery around the Ark. If you read the opening kind of like the opening crawl, so to speak, of the rule book that talks about the Ark and why people are going to the Ark. There is quite a bit of mystery surrounding it of why these these expeditionary parties are going to this ship that just appeared out of these mountains and never returning, and why adventurers who are heralded and heralded as some of the strongest and best adventurers across the land are going there and then never returning. So there's mystery inherently in Testament's lore. And so I wanted to pull upon that even further. And the way that I decided to do that was, all right, let's have a missing family member. Let's get away from the dying family member and let's have a missing family member. Let's make it ambiguous. Is the family member dead? Are they not dead? But I needed like an extra punch at the end of this biography to kind of further hammer home why Lunana would go on this mission. But I wanted it to indicate that she's going on this mission, but she kind of already knows what she's going to find. And so, I have this last sentence here. She stated that she had spoken with the Poku, and that Poku mentioned she, Lunana's sister, was headed to the Ark with an expeditionary party. You are already told by this point in the rulebook that every expeditionary party that's ever gone to the Ark has not returned. Lunana knows that. I mean, everyone knows that. Everyone across Maren Glav knows that if you go to the Ark, it's a death sentence because no one's ever returned, really. And so I like this idea of Lunana chasing something that she knows probably doesn't exist any longer. And that at the end of Lunana's journey, there's likely to be despair, confirmation of what she probably already knows. But, it's kind of like, if you don't see it in person, if you don't see the body, there's always hope, that kind of thing. And so I kind of followed that psychology. And put that onto Lunana, sort of like, someone who's searching for a missing person, and how they always talk about they have hope until, they have hope. A lot of those folks have hope until their last breath, because it's like, well, I've never had the closure of being able to see what actually happened, but I also don't have confirmation one way or the other, of whether this person is gone for good or not. And I wanted to carry that over into Lunana and give her that story of where she's holding on to this hope, but feels sort of like deep down that at the end of this path is not going to be something that I want to confront, even if it's something that I kind of know, even if it's something I sort of know what it is, what it's going to be. So I like that story, especially because it's juxtaposed against this really kind of soft, vibrant, enthusiastic veneer. If you look at her character portrait here, she looks very happy. And so I wanted to juxtapose that with actually a pretty sad story, or what could be a sad story. You never know what's going to happen in the lore of Testament. You never know where the story is going to go. So that was Lunana, why I kind of wrote her backstory in the way that I did. If we want to transfer over to Reardane, which is the other character, I think actually Reardane was the first character we unlocked in the campaign, and then Lunana was the last one. I could be misremembering that, but I think that's right. I had told Curl very early on that if we were going to add a new character to the game, I wanted it to be a Dragoon. I love Dragoons. I know Dragoons have gotten shit in 14 and 11. They always, they're very meme-worthy when it comes to the MMORPGs that they're a part of that bear the Final Fantasy moniker. And so even with that, I love them. Kain from Final Fantasy IV is one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters. And so I just have a natural attachment to Dragoons. And since one wasn't represented in the original 4 characters, I said, all right, I'm changing that. This is what I want. Someone in the chat said Dragoons are the best. Yes, they absolutely are. They are the best. Even though I don't main one any longer, I main a white mage. I still love them. They're my first love, I guess you could say. So we had decided, though, that unlike in Final Fantasy XIV, that the Dragoon in Testament was going to be more of a tanky character. So again, you want to pay homage to your original source material, but you also don't want to just completely copy it. And so, so this Dragoon, Reardane, is quite tanky. And he's got a very different backstory than Lunana. And his is born with the gift of communing with the legendary dragon god Einhanyar. Riordan was granted the title of Cerulean Scale at an early age, a title given only to the one chosen by Einhanyar to see his will through so-called visions. Because of his abilities, Riordan was taught the ways of the lands at a young age, which aided him in becoming the commander of Wyvarn's military, the Cerulean Dragoons. So already, this feels very different than Lunana, and that was the whole purpose. If I was going to be introducing these two new characters, I wanted them to feel very different. So I like the idea of Riordan being sort of this inherently gifted character. Holland, who is the knight character of the original four characters, has a pedigree, has a lineage of knighthood in his family. And so he's got a little bit of story similarity with Riordan, but how it happened to them is very different. Also, Holland he sort of has it, you know, his father was a knight, his grandfather was a knight, his grandfather's father was a knight, so there's this long succession of knights in his family. Riordan's journey, though, is very different. Like, this is something that was born into him, that he just has this power that he didn't choose to have, it chose him. And so he didn't really have a choice other than to walk this path, where Holland, although his family before him were knights, he had a choice to walk that path. He chose to walk the path that those before him walked. Riordan never had that choice, and so because of that, he becomes the commander of this particular nation's military, and that military is referred to as the Cerulean Dragoons. But it says, however, after arrival within the Dragoons claimed to have the ability to commune with the dragon as well, a civil war erupted, leading to the near decimation of the Wyvardi people. When the smoke of the Dragoon War cleared, Riordan realized he could no longer commune with the dragon, and thus left Wyvarn in search of an ordinary life. But fate had a way of enlisting Riordan's lance once more. So, also sort of a tragic story in a way. It's a little bit more spelled out with Riordan, whereas Lunana's implied tragedy, Riordan is explicit tragedy. And so his story is interesting, and I think it's really seen on his face. He kind of the anguish, the grief that he's had to confront, and that is, civil war, the decimation of his people, and him being sort of at the heart of why that happened. Now, you don't know right now in the story whether this rival within the Dragoons actually had the ability to commune with this legendary dragon, but he certainly claimed it, and it led to this. It led to people picking sides, and the picking of sides led to this giant war that nearly led to the extinction of his people in many ways. And so Riordan carries that burden with him. So something that I wanted both of these characters to have is I wanted them to have grief, and I also wanted them to be carrying something. When I was writing him, I was taken back to a short story that I read in college called "The Things We Carry," which is a story about a soldier in the Vietnam War who sort of walks the reader through all the shit that he's seen and what he carries with him because of it. And when I was writing Riordan's story, I thought, I want to incorporate some of that into this character. And so I thought, how can I put a massive amount of burden on this dude's shoulders? And so I thought, well, it doesn't get more burdensome than feeling like you were the reason why your entire people were wiped out. They weren't completely wiped out, but damn near it because of the Civil War. And, to me, that, once I had that thought, it's like, okay, yeah, no, that's sufficiently heavy. That's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. And so at that point, it was just kind of fleshing things out. I should state, I only had so much real estate to work with when it came to these biographies. They had to fit, basically into about 200 words or so. But I wrote much, 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 much longer biographies for both of these characters that I then had this sort of distill down into 2 paragraphs. And so, for me as the lore writer, I know I know what's happened to these characters. I also know what is going to happen to these characters, but I liked the idea of giving the reader just enough, just that snapshot, because that's all that I really could with this amount of space. Just that snapshot of what's happening and what has happened, what's led these two characters to the life of basically mercenaries. You see at the beginning of the rule book why the original four characters are why they are together. And it's a ragtag group of folks. They come from all walks of life, and essentially they're acting as mercenaries right now. They're just sort of wanderers. But these two, I wanted them to feel very different. And so the idea was, well, let's give them kind of a greater purpose than our original four, who feel very sort of aimless. And that's how they ultimately came together, is, each of them were sort of aimless in their objectives and then kind of found one another and then rallied around this common cause. Whereas these two characters have a cause already that they themselves are rallied behind. And now they're going to be sort of inserting themselves into this party who collectively has a cause, but separately, maybe not so much. And so I liked, again, to use the word juxtaposition, I liked the juxtaposition of these bonus characters when compared with the original four. And, probably part of the reason why the bonus characters feel a little different than the original four characters is, Kuro wrote the original four characters. And so he had a vision for those characters in his game. And I learned as much about Testament before I ever wrote this, but ultimately, he gave me carte blanche to write the lore, and I said, all right, well, I have a chance to really kind of add depth to these characters, whereas he wasn't really concerned with that, and that was fine. But I wanted, if I kind of in the beginning knew I wanted to do more with Testament, especially down the line. So it's like, all right, let's start building out this world now, and thus, giving these two bonus characters, I think, more of a backstory than the original four. So Reardane is a very defensive class. He can take hits. He's a great tank. He can take the place of Holland if you're wanting to stick with kind of the traditional Holy Trinity. But, that's the fantastic part about Testament. You don't have to roll with the Holy Trinity in your group. You can have Reardane, who's supposed to be, a tank, and his character ability clearly makes it known that he's probably meant to be a tank. But you can then load him up with healing skills, or you can load him up with range skills, you can load him up with buffs or debuffs, and that's kind of the beauty of Testament, is you can morph these characters into anything you want them to be. If you want to stick to that Holy Trinity, you definitely can, because the game was sort of designed with that in mind. But it was also designed around the idea of, no, let's give players the space, the room to breathe and kind of do what they want with these characters, especially those folks who are kind of tired of, tank, healer, DPS, that kind of thing. But nevertheless, I always played and still play Testament in a very Holy Trinity kind of way. So Reardane is often my tank, takes the place of Holland. I love both of these characters. I love them for different reasons. I think if you said you have to choose one of these characters, which one do you like more? I think I would say Reardane from a design and a gameplay standpoint. And I would say that I like Lunana's backstory slightly more, just because I like mystery. There's mystery in Reardane's, but not nearly as much intrigue as there is with Lunana. So I'm excited for people to try these out, because the Japanese audience never got a chance to play Lunana or Reardane. Clearly, they didn't exist for the Japanese release. So this is the first time that people are really going to get to test this out. And so, we did as much play testing as we could with these two characters. The designer, who was not Kuro, but nevertheless, an associate, sort of a colleague or a peer of Kuro's, designed these characters, and they did extensive play testing. And so it'll be interesting to see, once it gets in the hands of 1,500 people, how players end up utilizing these two characters. Because I'm sure, certainly all the playtesting we and Manifest Destiny did does not equate to 1,500 people. So other people are going to experience these characters in ways we never did, and that's really exciting to me. And hopefully people like the lore as much as we do on the team. Again, Testament is something that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, and part of what we love about it is the world. So we'll see where these stories go in the future. So that's our deep dive tonight on two characters, on Reardane and Lunana. Where they come from, where they're going, why they join up with the party. And so, yeah, that is the last topic for tonight. A bit of a longer a bit of a longer session, a bit of a longer episode tonight, despite not having as much questions, but we got into some new stuff. We hit a lot of points. We're going to try to bring this episode topic, concept into the fold more often. Like I said, not every week, but we will be doing this regularly. What regularly means at this point, I'm not quite sure. It might mean once every 2 weeks. It might mean once every month. I'm not sure. It might mean once a week for a while. It's ever changing. I'm not committing to any kind of time frame. But nevertheless, I want to continue to do this. And I also see in the chat that someone said we got some quality options on Twitch, which is fantastic. That's something that we have not had thus far. Sin in the chat said, "Very nice to see. Makes me even more excited to get the game in my hands." Yeah, and that was kind of the point, and that's why I've been talking about Testament so much lately. Is it really is right upon us? I think it'll, with any luck, it'll probably hit before Wild Hunt Festival, though maybe not a ton before Wild Hunt Festival. But nevertheless, since it's sort of first up on our release docket, I've been trying to kind of dive into it because that's what people are going to be playing first. And I know that there's a large portion of the fan base who is looking forward to Testament. So I want to continue to reveal parts about it. I hope people enjoy the lore of the game. You never know if people enjoy lore when it comes to board games. Some people play board games simply to engage with the mechanics. It's not like a video game, though certainly plenty of people play video games and don't give a shit about the game's story. But I do think that you get a far higher percentage of folks playing video games who also want to learn more about the story and the lore of the worlds that they're playing in. I don't necessarily know if that is the same for board games, but nevertheless, I really love lore. I really love story in board games. In some ways, I like it more in board games. And so I wanted to bring some of that love to our games, and Testament, being right up there with the game that I want to talk about the lore the most, mostly because I was, directly involved in writing it, so I know it the best. So we'll continue to do this. We'll continue to reveal lore. I'm hoping to do some more story stuff in the future that's a little bit more community driven. I haven't quite decided yet just how I'm going to dole out more of the lore, but I definitely want to. Haven't quite figured out the method that I'm going to use to do that, though. And I've made no bones about the fact that I want to do more with Testament in terms of expansions and that kind of thing. So, lore can be explored in future games as well. And I certainly would want to do that if we chose to do more with Testament in the future, as in terms of expansions, more content, more game releases, etc. The problem with Testament is it's just damn expensive. The art is top notch. It's not like they're, hiring a bunch of hacks to illustrate the game. I mean, the game is incredibly expensive to produce for that very reason. Not only are there a ton of components, but all of those components needed art, and all of the art is of like the highest quality. And so putting together an expansion for Testament or a new release, under the expansion name would not be a cheap endeavor, especially because Kuro has no interest in returning to the game himself. So it would really be a LionWing funded project. It would be a LionWing designed project. We would certainly use a lot of the same designers that helped design Testament, but Kuro would not be directly involved in it, other than probably getting that sweet 10% royalty check for using the name, and also, confirming or denying certain things if we have questions about lore, game mechanics, or that kind of thing, to say, yeah, that would work, or no, that's not what I had originally envisioned, that kind of thing. But it really would be a LionWing production at that stage. And so I want to follow that path. It's just figuring out the financial element of it. It's pretty steep. It's a pretty big commitment. I mean, just the ask to get the game printed was $25,000. And of course, as I've mentioned many times before, your base funding ask in Kickstarter is usually not the real ask of what you need. It's usually higher. And so you take the $25,000, but higher than that, you put on the development cost, which is probably just about the same amount of money, and you've got quite a financial burden to bear there just to be able to produce another game of the same quality with about the same amount of content in it. So it's not a decision that you can make quickly. It's not a decision that I can make quickly, but it is a decision that I am wanting to make, and certainly sooner rather than later. So, well, that'll do it for this episode of LionWing Talks. I appreciate everyone once again joining in on the chat, asking questions, dropping your questions in the Discord, hitting us up on social media. Again, you can find us across the board: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at LWing Publishing. Drop into the Discord with our new community folks. I think you're going to see some new stuff being introduced, contests, events, that kind of thing. Just more things to get folks talking and having fun in that Discord. We've got about 400 people in the Discord right now, so it's not a paltry number or anything like that. And so we're looking to grow that side of LionWing, and I can't wait to do it alongside of all you. And that's part of what this show is all about, is inviting your questions, answering them, giving you some honest answers about what's happening behind the scenes at LionWing, and also, what we're doing behind the scenes. Hopefully we've done a little bit of that today. So until next time, I am Brad Hailstorm. I will find you all next week, Wednesday night, 9 p.m. EST on Twitch. See you then.